Welcome to HortTube, where we talk all things gardening. My name is Jim Putnam, and this is an Eleanor Taber Indian Hawthorn. This is Eleanor Taber Indian Hawthorn, a low-growing evergreen shrub. Has these beautiful dark green foliage, pink flowers in the spring, followed by purple berries in the fall. Eleanor Taber Indian Hawthorns can reach 2 to 3 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet in width. It just grows as a perfect little low dome that's just wider than it is tall. It just kind of tapers out toward the edge. Really, really nice growth habit. Eleanor Taber is hardy in zones 7 to 10. If you put this plant out in open space in zone 7, or especially like zone 7A, if you were to put this out in a parking lot, about once every 10 years, we're gonna get a winter that will really, really knock these back. I think if you're in zone 7, this is best used as a foundation plant just for long-term thinking. And zones 8, 9, and 10, pretty much anywhere you'd want to use it. Eleanor Taber is a very low-growing Indian Hawthorn variety. A lot of the other varieties can get 4, 5, 6, even 8 feet tall. This one only gets about 3 feet tall, and its rate of growth is kind of equal to that. This is a very slow-growing plant, maybe 3 or 4 inches a year in the ground. Almost all Indian Hawthorns would prefer full sun. Really, a half a day sun or more is required on this plant. They get foliar problems if the leaves stay wet for prolonged periods of time, so you definitely want them in a space where they're drying out quickly in the morning from the dew that's on the leaves, and then really cooking in a lot of that midday sun. This is a perfect low foundation evergreen shrub. So if you have low windows or a low porch, this is absolutely perfect plant for you to use. Or it can be used in the layer in front of some taller shrubs that you have on your foundation. It could also be mass planted out in the open yard in zones 8, 9, or 10. I probably just wouldn't do it in zone 7 just because of it could have some winter damage. But these beautiful pink flowers in the spring planted in mass are absolutely fantastic. Eleanor Taber blooms in mid-spring with absolutely beautiful clusters of pale pink flowers. I call Indian Hawthorns azaleas for the full sun. Azaleas need to go into part shade. Indian Hawthorns in the sun, and they bloom about the same time. Maybe the Indian Hawthorns bloom just a hair later, but not much. The other nice thing about Indian Hawthorns is where the flower was, they actually produce a berry, clusters of berries that turn purple or almost black in the late season, so it gives you an additional time of color. One of the other nice things about Indian Hawthorns is the new growth is kind of a reddish bronze color, and that stays on it through all of the late spring and early summer, and it's really a nice feature. It creates a nice two-tone foliage. Indian Hawthorns need good drainage when we plant them. That means we just don't want a place where it's going to sit in water between rains. If you think the area you're planting in is going to stay moist all the time, it's probably not a good call for this plant. This plant's extremely drought tolerant, and if it was a drier space, I wouldn't hesitate to put it in. If it is a place that has like heavy clay and you think it's going to stay wet between waterings, would definitely want to elevate this plant and mix in some pine bark soil conditioner, which is like a chunky bark mix that you can get at any of the garden centers. Mix that 50-50 with the clay. So when you dig your hole, dig at the depth of the root ball, pull your soil out, mix it 50-50 with the pine bark soil conditioner, and then put some of that mix in the bottom of the hole, maybe 2 inches of it back in the bottom of the hole. So when you pull this plant out of the container, put it into the ground, it's sitting up about 2 inches above the original grade. That'll ensure that it never will have water sitting around the crown of the plant where it goes into the ground. Pull your soil up to the edge of that and then lightly mulch. Don't cover anything that's not covered when you purchased it. If you were going to use these in a coastal area where it's very, very sandy, you would definitely want to mix in some compost or some cow manure or some peat moss to make sure you're retaining a little moisture between waterings. Other than that, if you had a soil that drained reasonably well, that wasn't clay but wasn't all sand, I probably would just throw this plant in the ground, elevated and lightly mulched, and not worry about it. They're pretty tough. One other consideration on these, when you pull it out of the container, if it's overgrown in the pot, it's probably going to be root bound in the pot. By that I mean the roots are going to be really wrapped around one another, circling where they reached the edge of the container and then just started matting together around the container. If it's that way when you pull it out, you'll want to pull it though some, try to break them apart. If that doesn't work, you can actually cut into them a little bit. Take a knife and cut maybe a 1/2 inch in, top to bottom, maybe 3 times around this, and that'll get the roots starting to go outward. This plant, once it's established in most soils, is really never going to have to be watered unless we went a very, very long time without rain. 2 months in the summer with 95+ degree days, maybe I would consider watering it. But this is one of the most drought tolerant plants you're going to own, which just makes it great. If this is a plant that you put in the ground, put 2-3 inches of mulch on it, and then put an irrigation system on it and water it 2 times a week, you're almost certainly going to kill this plant. This plant is not a plant that needs ongoing watering like that. It's just a plant that will occasionally, maybe once every few years, need to be rescued with a once a summer watering. Indian hawthorns are acid-loving plants, so any slow-release fertilizer for acid-loving plants will work perfect on Indian hawthorns. I would just do it in the early spring. This is not a plant that I would fertilize after midsummer, and the reason for that is it's vulnerable to some winter damage. If you fertilized it in midsummer, put on some new growth near the end of summer, almost certainly the first freeze is just going to nuke that new growth, and it's going to be black through the wintertime and probably won't flower the following spring. In terms of pruning Eleanor Taber Indian hawthorns, there's really, unfortunately, not a great time to do it. If I prune them before they flower in the spring, I'm probably going to lose the flowers. If I prune them after they flower in the spring, they're not going to end up with the berries. So there's really just not a great time to do it. So if I had to prune this plant, I'd probably really go after it very, very hard so that I wouldn't have to do it for several years after, so that I wouldn't repeatedly be sacrificing the flowers and the berries. Where Eleanor Taber Indian hawthorns really excel over other Indian hawthorns is in disease resistance. Most of the other varieties of Indian hawthorns get leaf spot problems, where the leaves get spotted up. Those leaves tend to drop to the ground. When it rains, that fungus bounces back up on the plant, and it's just a repeating cycle every time you get long periods of cloudy or moist conditions where the plants go through that. My Eleanor Taber Indian hawthorns have been in the ground 20 years, and I've never had any kind of leaf spot issues on them. So that's really the beauty of this plant. It really doesn't have any insect related problems. The big pest for Indian hawthorns is deer. If you have deer problems, this plant will get eaten to the ground. They will eat not only the leaves, they'll eat the wood on this plant all the way to the ground. There's something in this plant that deer can't resist. They'll walk around roses and everything to get to it. If you have deer problems, this can only be used as a foundation plant for you on the inside of your sidewalks where the deer probably won't cross. So what are you waiting for? Even you can grow the low maintenance, low growing, evergreen, pink flowering Eleanor Taber Indian hawthorns. Thank you for watching, and if this video was helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. Also, comment below with any questions you have about Eleanor Taber Indian hawthorns or any other Indian hawthorn varieties. Thanks again.